She wanted to kill him, but she didn't have the heart. He was just so pathetic. Well, he was human. They were all pathetic. Weak, sniveling cowards who didn't like to fight and didn't like those who did. Such an alien mindset, but of course they were aliens. As irritating as it was to be expected. Takasa was strong. She had been born first of her brood and had devoured 5 of her sisters. Or at least, so she had been told, proudly by her mother. Her own memories only stretched back as far as her second molt, when her carapace had finally hardened enough to leave the nest without fear of being attacked and eaten, at least not by anyone from her own clan. She would always be a potential meal to any Masaka not of her clan, or indeed any of the multitude of dangerous animals that stalked their world. That is why her mother had trained her. She had trained her to be strong as a mother should. Takasa's first clear memories were of sparring with her sisters, the 2 others that survived from her brood, and the 6 from the broods preceding hers, knowing that their mother would step in to stop them from killing each other, and still trying to draw blood anyway, just in case mother was lax and they had the opportunity to remove some competition and gain a free meal. But her mother had also trained her to be smart. That had taken longer, but eventually she had managed to drill it into Takasa's extremely thick skull that her sisters were more than just rivals for her mother's attention. They were potential allies, and in a world where threats came from every corner, you always needed allies. Even the best fighter couldn't win every battle alone. You couldn't give yourself a 4th set of arms or a 3rd set of eyes, but having someone who was willing to fight by your side could give you all that and more. Someone you could truly trust was more precious than the food on your plate. You could survive missing a couple of meals, but a single betrayal could be fatal. Family could be trusted absolutely. If you had been raised together, trained together, bore the same blood, then you would generally have the same priorities. No one betrayed family, for if you did, no one would ever trust you again, and that was a death sentence. Your clan could be trusted, because many of them would be your family, and those that weren't would have strong family ties. One family alone could not survive. Each member of a clan needed the others. Clans weren't quite as rock-solid as family, but they generally lasted for as long as that need lasted. There might come a day when betrayal proved more profitable, when another clan pushed too hard and the only choice was to bow to them and discard anyone who wouldn't or couldn't accept the new order, or when opportunity came calling for those who were unburdened by dead weight. But for as long as your clan needed each other, your clan could be trusted. Everyone else could only be trusted to kill you at the first opportunity. That was the way of things. The weak died, the strong survived. Except, apparently that wasn't the way of things everywhere. Some aliens saw the universe much the same as the Masaka did, but others had a very different attitude. And humans were the strangest of all. Their society was riddled with weakness. They should have been destroyed long ago, and yet they thrived. They had seen off attacks from the Iza and the Yogagtal, and even attempts by the nearest Masaka clan to claim territory from them had been unsuccessful. They were a worthy challenge, certainly, or potential allies. The first Masaka clan to try attacking humans were the Kadana, and it was not the easy victory they expected. This was watched closely by Takasa's clan, the Jokota, longtime enemies of the Kadana, following the universal principle of my enemy's enemy is my friend. When the Kadana clan had been defeated by the humans, the Jokota clan had approached the aliens to sound out the possibility of a mutually beneficial alliance. They would crush the Kadana together, and after that, well, the Jokota would pursue whatever path proved to be the most beneficial for them. So did Takasa come to be on this miserable backwater of a planet. The clan matriarchs had ordered her mother, and her mother had ordered Takasa and her sisters to join the assault force with the humans. The Kadana had set up a mining outpost here, but when they discovered that they were near the territory of an isolated, poorly defended species, they turned it into a staging post for their invasion. 5 human colonies had fallen to the Kadana before the humans rallied and drove them back again. Now the battle lines were exactly where they'd started, but the Kadana were now much weaker, and the humans much stronger. Relatively speaking, Takasa had seen a little of the humans until now, and she was not impressed. For a start, they were barely half her size, only 1 pair of arms and 1 pair of legs when she had 2 of each, plus the vestigial arms on her back. Only 1 pair of eyes as well. How did a species that couldn't see behind them ever live past infancy? If she were half crippled and half blind, Takasa would still have been a better warrior than any of these weaklings. And yet together they were pushing the Kadana back. All of the landing zones had been secured, and the vanguard had stormed the peripheral fortifications guarding the main installations on the planet. The battle was far from over, but things were going well. Again, relatively speaking. Takasa's unit had been assigned to take a bunker with a company of human shock troops, or at least their equivalent of shock troops. They had spent most of the time so far hiding in their vehicles. Admittedly, those vehicles had been very effective at reducing the sentry turrets guarding the bunker to smoldering wreckage, but now they were in the tunnels, and that advantage was gone. The Kadana guarding the bunker had counterattacked once they'd breached the second level, and at close range they'd done serious damage to the human soldiers before the combined firepower of the humans and their Masaka allies, plus the latter's sheer brute strength, had brought down the attackers. One of the humans, a captain, had received a glancing blow to his chest and been thrown against the wall. He hadn't even been able to raise his gun in time before the Kadana warrior incapacitated him. Takasa was seriously tempted to put him out of his misery, but he was so pathetic it would have been beneath her. Like stepping on a bug. Why even bother? Besides, he was human. They weren't natural fighters, not like Masaka. Personally, Takasa didn't even see the point of making an alliance with them, but the matriarchs of Clan Jokota had decided to work with the humans to bring down Clan Kadana, so allowances had to be made for their inherent frailty. Takasa was stuck with them whether she liked it or not. "Get up," she barked at him, and the translator on her suit mirrored her words in the strange, high-pitched human language. "We must keep moving or the defenders will regroup." The Kadana were retreating, but they weren't defeated. There could well be miles of tunnels beneath the bunker, and Takasa would have to make sure every one of them was clear before the assault on the main base could proceed. She had 100 clan warriors under her command, including 2 of her sisters. She kept her sisters close, knowing that they were the only ones she could truly rely on here. She trusted her clan cousins to obey, but no more than that. They might take a risk on her behalf for the sake of the clan, but then again they might not. She wouldn't bet her life on them if she could help it. A few of her troops had stopped to feast on the fallen, ripping open armor and wrenching off limbs to get at the meat within, an ancient battlefield custom, since before the dawn of time Masaka had fed on Masaka. But it was one they didn't have time for right now. She slapped them back into line and ordered the advance to continue. The humans fell into position behind them. They were keeping up, at least, despite having taken heavy casualties in that first counterattack. The next challenge was a defensive post that protected access to the third level. 2 heavy cannons that could fire a solid slug capable of punching through even Takasa's thick armor, plus gun slits for the defenders to fire through. The door looked like it would stand up to everything short of a small nuclear blast. Takasa knew exactly how to handle an obstacle like this, and for once it wasn't to charge straight at it. The corridor had been designed to keep any number of attacking infantry at bay. If she ordered a frontal assault, it would be a slaughter. Yet still, Takasa had to deliver a skull-ringing blow to one of her troops who was about to charge down the corridor. Not every mother trained her daughters as thoroughly as Takasa's had, and many of the clan's younger soldiers knew how to do little more than attack, 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 which most of the time was the appropriate course of action, but the ability to spot the situations where it wasn't was of considerable value to the clan. Hence, Takasa was in charge of this unit and not her clan cousins. "Bring down the roof," she ordered. "Use our high-explosive rocket launchers." It was a tedious process, but it was the only way to deal with a prepared defensive position like this. The gun emplacements were far too heavily armored to be damaged by any of the weapons they could take into the tunnels, but the steel silicate sheath that lined the tunnels would crack eventually. Using high explosives, they could blast chunks out of the tunnel roof, and hopefully bring down a fair amount of rock with it. This would provide cover from the hailstorm of firepower that would otherwise shred anyone who tried to enter the corridor. Enough cover for a team to make it to the door and cut through with a high-energy plasma lance. All of it time-consuming, finely tuned work, but there was no other choice. If you used too much high explosive, then you ran the risk of bringing the whole tunnel down, sealing the enemy position behind it, which would be no bad thing in the short term, but they'd dig themselves out quickly enough, and then you'd have a problem. She relayed her plan to the commander of the human unit, and he deferred to her, as he should. The rocket launchers were longer than the human was tall, and even if they could lift one trying to fire, it would probably rip their arms off. The specialized heavy weapons team was comprised of 3 pairs of loader and bearer, a specialty that required a good deal of cooperation, so Takasa had made sure each pair were sisters, for maximum efficiency. Then it was just a question of clearing the rest of her unit back to where they wouldn't be caught in the backwash of the rockets, and leaving them to work. This was one of the most demanding parts of her job. Not only did she have to manage her own instinct for aggression, she had to make sure the rest of her unit maintained their position as well. Sitting still and doing nothing in the middle of a battle did not come naturally to a Masaka assault squad. It was hard to judge how well the humans were holding up, but they were at least able to sit still without being smacked, and that was all she needed from them. They weren't particularly useful, but at least they weren't being a nuisance. The rocket teams were having trouble blowing off chunks big enough to act as cover. The defenders' cannons were able to reduce many of them to gravel, so despite having wasted a significant amount of time there already, they were only halfway along the corridor. Takasa was getting impatient, and was just considering ordering an assault anyway, when the human commander opened a private comm link. "This is going too slowly. Let us handle it." It took Takasa a moment to fully process what he was saying. As far as she was concerned, the humans were only there to support her troops. They weren't supposed to spearhead the assault. They'd be slaughtered within seconds. On the one hand, losing their support didn't really bother her, but on the other hand, the matriarchs did not appreciate tactically stupid decisions, even if they only sacrificed their expendable allies. "Your forces would all be killed before they could open the doors. My guys are smaller and faster than yours. Those cannons defending the doors are designed to take out Masaka. Let us try." "Do not challenge my authority." Takasa drew herself up to her full height, towering over the man. "You are here to support our attack. I'm here to do a job, and I'm going to do it. And I'm not trying to challenge your authority. I'm simply offering you more options. Do you really want to sit here all day?" Takasa thought about this. There was still a part of her that wanted to squish the little creature for insubordination. But on the other hand, was it really insubordination if there was no violence involved? On the rare occasions when her troops talked back to her, they usually did it with their fists. Since he was being respectful, Takasa decided to at least consider what he was saying. They were smaller, and they were faster. Maybe they would fare better against the corridor's defenses than the Masaka under her command. "Proceed. But if you fail, do not expect us to help you. I will not sacrifice my troops to rectify your mistake. In fact, once you've failed, I will continue using rockets whether any of you are still alive or not." "Well, at least we know where we stand," the human commander said. And Takasa had enough intuition to sense that there was subtext there that the translator wasn't quite catching, but not to work out what it was. "Don't worry, we'll be quick and we won't expect you to bail us out." He must have switched to his unit comms, because although Takasa didn't hear him issue the orders, a moment later a dozen humans were moving up to take position at the front of the formation. The Masaka troops watched mutinously as they passed, but a look from Takasa and a swift kick to the nearest one was enough for them to keep their thoughts to themselves. Still, they wouldn't tolerate sitting here for much longer, not while the aliens were allowed to fight. Takasa ordered the rocket teams back, then made sure she had a camera in position to see right along the length of the corridor. Apart from the short and brutal fight when they breached the second level, she had yet to see the humans in combat. It would be a good idea to get a measure of their tactics and capabilities, so that their alliance could function more efficiently. And for after the Kadana were destroyed, when Clan Jakota would be left with holdings that bordered human space. While she was only a junior officer now, Takasa fully planned to be a matriarch herself one day. And the hallmark of a matriarch was forward thinking. Masaka got more analytical as they aged, so that after they completed menopause, their violent tempers cooled considerably, and they became rational, measured, and logical, ruthlessly logical. The matriarchs of Clan Jakota would already be planning the next conflict with the next enemy, whoever that might be. While Takasa was far from being a matriarch herself right now, it didn't take a supercomputer intellect to work out that after the war was over, the weakling, humans would be right on their doorstep. Age alone was no guarantee of a place in the matriarchy. A Masaka who'd never used her brain much would not suddenly become a genius just because she hit menopause. Intellectual thought was like any other skill. It took training and it took practice. So when the humans started their attack, Takasa watched them carefully, both with her current mission in mind and with an eye to future developments. They started by using the cover that had already been blasted out of the ceiling, flitting from one chunk of rubble to the next. They really were much more agile than her troops, but they were much smaller, so that was to be expected. That also meant they could take cover in places that would have been useless to a Masaka. The cannons blasted a few chunks off the rubble, but the no doubt deeply frustrated gun crews weren't able to find their target fast enough before it disappeared into cover again. Then they ran out of things to hide behind, and before them lay 30 meters or more of open corridor. Cannon rounds streamed out of the barrels like a swarm of angry insects. Anyone trying to make a dash for the door would be blown apart in meaty chunks. Takasa watched with interest, wondering whether the humans would admit failure now or get a few of their people killed just to make a point. A moment later, the humans started firing. The latter then. Their weapons would do nothing to the armor protecting the cannons and the murder holes around the door. And if they thought it would, then when the first of them stepped out of cover, they would find out their mistake the hard way. Except they didn't step out of cover. 6 of them lay down flat on the floor and started crawling. The cannons fired another burst, but it went right over the humans. That was when Takasa realized that the enemy positions were being blinded by the sheer volume of firepower. Everything, including their thermal vision and their electromagnetic sensors, would now be useless. It wasn't the first time that tactic had been tried, but normally it didn't do much good. If the cannons couldn't see, then they would fire anyway, confident that they would hit something in the narrow confines of the corridor. And normally they would have. Any Masaka in that tunnel would have several holes in them by now, no matter how fast they charged towards the door. But the humans continued to methodically crawl under the cannon's field of fire, pushing themselves to go as fast as they could, but never raising themselves more than a few millimeters off the ground. Small arms fire from the murder holes added an extra layer of danger, but although there were several close calls, none of it touched the humans edging towards the end of the tunnel. The humans providing the covering fire weren't quite as lucky. Their armor was enough to protect them from the splinters of rock shrapnel created by the defenders' fire, but inevitably, a cannon round got a lucky hit. One of the humans lost their right arm just below the elbow. Takasa noted that he reacted with admirable discipline. Instead of going into a fury and charging towards the source of his pain, he went still for a moment, then signaled one of his comrades to move up and take his place. Slowly, taking care not to expose himself to enemy fire, he retreated down the corridor, while at the same time another human moved up to replace him. Takasa was sure that none of her troops would have reacted with such restraint. At least, not without being forcibly reminded to stay focused and seek medical attention. The soldiers leading the attack were at the door now, and with the huge amount of firepower passing back and forth, they'd have to be quick before they were hit either by a lucky shot from the enemy or a ricochet from their own side. Takasa had no idea what they were going to do now. They didn't have the equipment to cut through the reinforced door. The gun slits were arranged to cover every part of the corridor. 2 just inside of the cannon mounts pointing straight down the corridor. 2 in the walls either side of the door covering the blind spot directly under the first 2, and 2 in the ceiling pointing straight down. Only the ones pointing down the corridor were firing. Whoever was supposed to be using the others was clearly hanging back so they didn't catch a stray round, assuming that there was nothing there for them to shoot at. The 6 humans were pressed right up against the walls. The 2 that were meant to cover the others' blind spots could have seen them, but if they were watching at all, they wouldn't be expecting the small figures now lying directly in front of them. Takasa didn't hear the signal, but suddenly the covering fire ceased. In the same instant, 2 of the humans by the door stood up. They were holding their backpacks, which Takasa had assumed were just carrying the usual magazines, medical kit, etc. It took them only a second or two to hurl them through the murder holes, then drop back down, all while the cannons were continuing to hurl out a stream of buzzing, screaming death just an arm's length from them. The explosion sent a gout of flame and debris out through the murder holes. No surprise to Takasa, she'd recognized the satchel charges. Usually there were more high-tech solutions available, but sometimes the best solution was just to pack a bag with as much high explosive as a solider could carry. Humans couldn't carry much compared to Masaka, but it was enough to do the job. Whoever had been on the other side of those gun slits would be so much red paste right now. However, as soon as they'd overcome the shock, 2 more Kadana would just step into their place. Takasa didn't see where the humans were going to go from here. Then she realized their plan, and this time she was surprised. On either side, 2 of the humans boosted up the third, and he disappeared through the hole. Of course, they were just small enough that that could work, provided the hole had been widened a bit. Quickly, the rest of the assault team followed. Soldiers on me. She ordered her unit. The humans might prove just enough of a distraction to get those cannons to stop firing for a moment. Plasma cutting team to the second rank. She would still expect to lose a few on the way in, but they might have a chance now. If one of the plasma cutters falls, the next trooper in line takes their place. Cutting through the door is your primary objective. All other soldiers are to focus on suppressing the gun slits and protecting the cutting teams. Just wait a moment, the human commander told her, then wisely followed it up with, "At least, that's what I'd advise. Your team did well, but it will only take moments for the enemy to kill them. We must take advantage of the opportunity they have given us." Takasa hissed at him. Hopefully his translator picked up the emphasis. Charge now, and that still leaves you sitting there trying to cut through that door. Let me send my guys. They can fit through the holes we just made. Your people can't. Takasa thought about this. It made sense, but she didn't like the idea of taking a back seat, and she knew her troops would be even less happy about it. Your unit will go first, but we will be close behind you. All you'll be doing is sitting outside a locked door. Not for long. Be grateful. When the enemy force you to retreat, you will have somewhere to retreat back to. If we retreat. And Takasa was starting to think this laughable excuse for a warrior didn't have any belligerence at all. She still didn't think he had any chance of holding the Kadana back for more than a few minutes before his people were slaughtered. But she respected his willingness to try going toe-to-toe with them. Whatever the outcome, we would need to be close by to exploit whatever damage you do to the defenders, she reminded him. Your call. Just don't let your people forget who they're supposed to be shooting at. So, can I take my company in first? Because any moment now those defensive positions are going to go quiet. As if on cue, the fire coming from the cannons ceased. Takasa only hesitated a fraction of a second before replying. Go! We will be close behind you. Again, to his credit, the human didn't hang around. As soon as Takasa gave him the go-ahead, he was sprinting down the tunnel, followed by the rest of his unit. The 6 who'd been covering the corridor were already moving up. They'd broken from cover the instant the cannons stopped firing, and were now almost at the door. Takasa watched as they climbed through the blown-out gun slits, while readying her own unit to attack. They were restless, but now they were moving again. They weren't too fractious. She had to deliver a heavy blow to one of the younger and more overenthusiastic members of the unit to stop her from firing down the corridor into the backs of the advancing humans. But although the trooper turned and snarled at her, she immediately backed down without needing further discipline. You do not fire until I say so. You do not move until I say so, Takasa barked. Discipline is the key to victory. It was not lost on her that the humans seemed to have much tighter discipline than the Masaka. Of course, they were also weak and lacking in aggression. It was a trade-off, and one that Takasa felt was much better balanced in her force, for all that keeping her clan cousins in line was sometimes a headache. And yet, the Kadana defenders had yet to drive back the humans and retake control of the cannons, and the human commander and the main body of his force was even now reaching the door. She opened a private comm link to her sisters. Keep a careful eye on our troops. Now that the humans are in front of us, there is the possibility for friendly fire. I do not want to have to explain to the matriarchs that the humans withdrew their forces from this planet because troops under our command got overexcited and killed some of them. Understood, sister. That said, do not let the humans compromise mission objectives. In a moment, I will order us to move up to the door. If they start retreating, we do not wait for them to get clear. We go through them. Those cannons could start firing again at any moment. Now form up the squads. We have to cut through the door before the Kadana force the humans to retreat. Her sisters acknowledged her without comment. She could tell they were disgruntled themselves that the humans had been given the chance to go in first, but trusted her judgment enough to not challenge her decision. The unit got into position with an acceptable amount of jostling and tussling. Any longer spent sitting idle and there would have been a problem, but soon they would be in the thick of combat. As soon as the last of the humans had disappeared through the broken wall, she ordered the charge. The Jokota assault squads thundered down the corridor, ready to tear through the door and slaughter the Kadana defenders sheltering on the other side. Even as she was watching her troops, making sure that they were staying in formation, she was also enjoying the surge of battle rage inside her. Soon, the Kadana would fall to her guns and her knives, and she would trample them into the ground and paint herself with their blood. The door was opening. Takasa was so surprised she almost stopped dead in the middle of the corridor, and with all her troops coming up behind her, that would not have been a good idea. Her first thought was that the Kadana were counterattacking, in which case they were about to be in for a bloody head-to-head fight. She raised her rifle, ready to gun down the first Kadana stupid enough to stick their head out. Then she saw the humans standing in the doorway. "Hold! Fire!" She screamed it into the unit comm channel as soon as she realized what was about to happen, and still, she wasn't quick enough. A dozen shots rang out, one of them from her own sister. Shot from the hip at a full run, they hit nothing, which was fortunate, although Takasa still noted the lack of accuracy. "We've secured the door. The Kadana are in retreat, taking up positions on the next level," the human commander informed her. Takasa was still more focused on her own unit, but she noted his words. As they reached the door and it became obvious that there were no Kadana there to kill, her troops paused. There was a very real chance that, frustrated by the lack of combat, they would take it out on the first thing they came across. Takasa ordered her sisters to bring their squads to a halt and make sure every one of their troops had their weapons pointed at the floor with the safeties on, while she did the same with her own. A couple of them required a knock on the head before her orders got through their haze of bloodlust, and this time one of them was stupid enough to do more than snarl at her. Takasa's knife was already coming out of its sheath as the soldier raised her rifle. The arm came off cleanly just below the elbow, and in the moment of shock the now armless soldier hesitated and found the knife at her throat. Takasa thought about ending it there and then, as an example to the rest of the unit, but on the other hand, it wouldn't be efficient to waste an otherwise decent soldier. "Take your arm and get to a med station," she ordered her clan cousin, faces only centimeters apart. "It is a clean cut. The medics will be reattach it with no loss of function if you are quick. Tomorrow, you will be at the front of every assault. Show that you are capable of discipline in the thick of combat, and you will redeem yourself. If you survive." The soldier didn't say anything for a moment, and Takasa could tell that a part of her was thinking about throwing her remaining fists into Takasa's face. The part of her that knew Takasa would decapitate her overruled it. Good. At least she was capable of that much rational thought. The soldier opened her fists, palm up, as a sign of submission, and Takasa let her grab her arm and start running to the surface. Then she addressed the rest of her troops. "Secure the area. Set up defensive positions at every access point and prepare for a counterattack. Move!" As the squads hurried to obey her order, she turned to her sisters. "When this position is consolidated, we will push forward onto the next level through the secondary tunnel here." She marked a dot on the shared map available via their visors, while tying down the defenders with diversionary strikes through the main tunnel and the branch tunnels here and here. She marked 3 more locations on the map. "Select the soldiers you think would be best suited to the diversionary attacks. They will need to be capable of breaking off when ordered and redeploying to support the main attack. Understood?" A moment to look at the map, and her sisters confirmed. It was nice to have at least 2 people here she could rely on. More than 2, actually. The human commander was waiting for her by the guard post, just inside of the doorway. Dead Kadana infantry littered the ground, and although there were the corpses of humans as well, there were not nearly as many as Takasa had expected. "This has gone better than expected," she observed. Once we got up on that gallery there, it was like shooting fish in a barrel," he said, pointing to the raised walkway overlooking the main route from the door. "They were expecting the attack to come through the main door. Once we got inside the casemate holding the cannons, we were able to get up to the second level." He pointed up to where an opening opened out onto the upper walkway from a passage that presumably led to the murder holes overlooking the approach to the door. The passages through there are designed to only let 1 Masaka through at a time, but we could get 4 guys along there. Surprised the hell out of them. Once we'd taken the upper level, the defenders waiting in the tunnel for you to breach the door didn't stand a chance. Takasa could see the pile of bodies by the stairs where they'd tried to counterattack anyway, and failed. Casualties? We lost 10 of ours and killed 27 of theirs. I'd estimate there are less than 100 defenders left. At least 50 were forced to retreat from this position, and some of them were wounded. Allow for a reserve guarding the secondary tunnels, but we should significantly outnumber them now. Informative and concise. Takasa could get used to this kind of efficiency. "Are you able to support our... Are you ready to continue the attack?" "We're ready." "Good. I'm marking your next position on the grid now," Takasa said, bringing up the map on her visor. Wait for my squad there to launch their attack, then push forward to the next intersection. The human agreed, and she was going to leave it at that, but then she added, "What do your people call you?" "Captain Patrick Marlowe." "Or just Marlowe?" "Marlowe." She tested the unfamiliar syllables. "We will take the position with the heaviest fighting. Stay close to me." "Understood." They advanced to the next defensive positions. The Kadana had run out of built-in fortifications, but they had erected hasty barricades across the tunnels. However, they didn't have the numbers now to guard all of them efficiently. Takasa ordered the diversionary attacks to begin while her troops traded fire with the main target. When she was sure that the defenders had committed their strength at the other barricades, she ordered her squad into position. The humans were behind them, but this was not the time for subtlety. This time, the Masaka would lead the charge. Rocket teams blasting down the corridor, keeping the enemy suppressed, Takasa led her squad against the Kadana defenders and smashed through them utterly and trampled them down and drove them before her until all that was left were the shattered corpses. It felt good. They pushed down to the third level quickly, but their easy victory had a downside. The Kadana had fled with such haste that their casualties had been comparatively light. They were now spread out around the remaining sections of the base. Splitting up her forces to chase them down would open Takasa up to a counterattack, or risk being ambushed in the warren of tunnels. This wasn't something that could be handled simply by charging in and chasing down every enemy they saw. Takasa was already halfway through working up an attack plan when she realized that she hadn't even considered the humans. Well, they were here. She might as well ask Marlowe for his input. Marlowe favored a more restrained approach, baiting the Kadana out of their defensive positions, then turning the ambush round on them. Takasa was still doubtful about an approach that left her troops taking a back seat. But after he'd explained in detail, she decided it was worth trying. The humans had fared poorly on the first level when the Kadana had still had the numbers for a mass charge. They did some damage to the Kadana at range, but if they weren't able to stop the charge, then they were nearly useless in melee against the larger, more aggressive Masaka. However, now the Kadana were truly on the defensive, and the maze of tunnels favored speed and coordination over brute aggression. Marlowe split his men into 5 sections of 12, with a reserve for emergencies, and had them sweep through the tunnels. Takasa was ready to send her troops in to take over from them, but soon it was clear that she didn't need to. The humans engaged the small pockets of defenders with small squads, drew them out of their positions, then retreated and lured them into a crossfire that saw them shot to pieces long before they got within melee range. Takasa watched with fascination. The human fighting style was so different to the Masaka way of war, fluid, yet disciplined. Her troops would never be able to execute those quick retreats and counterattacks, nor would they be able to coordinate the enfilading fire so precisely, trapping the enemy with no route of escape. Yes, the humans were much less durable than her people. One shot from a basic rifle could put them down for good, and if they did find themselves in a melee, then they would be nearly useless. But with clever tactics, they were usually able to cut down the enemy before they even had a chance to fight back. Piece by piece, Marlowe took the enemy defense apart, and as he did so, Takasa understood more and more how the Kadana attack on the human colonies had failed in the first place. It was a shame. They made excellent allies, and yet Takasa knew that once the Kadana were defeated, it wouldn't be long before she was fighting against them. It didn't feel right. Fighting alongside someone was more or less the closest relationship you could have. Nothing else required such trust, and as her mother had taught her, trust was the most valuable thing in the universe. It felt wrong to just throw that away, and it felt wrong to repay the humans for their help by turning on them. It was tempting to mention that to her mother, to suggest that there might be more of a future in cooperation with the humans rather than conquest. In fact, Takasa would like to tell the matriarchs themselves that the humans were much more valuable as allies than they were as prey. However, she knew exactly what they would say. They would tell Takasa that she was still young and emotional, that it was easy to develop positive feelings for an individual alien when working closely together, and lose sight of the big picture. When she got older, she would understand that they could not afford to factor sentiment into the calculations of survival. They might even be right. Maybe when she became a matriarch, if that day ever came, she would think that taking advantage of the humans' weakness to expand the clan's holdings was the most intelligent course of action. but right now it seemed a shame. When the humans had swept the level, Takasa sent her squads against the remaining positions that had been too tough for them to crack. She led one of the squads, taking point at the head of the charge and taking several shots from the defenders' fire. Her armor stopped all but one of them, and that only grazed her carapace. In the thick of the fighting, she hacked and slashed and carved smoldering furrows through them with her plasma gun. She was just sliding her knife out from between the neck plates of a Kadana warrior when she was aware of movement on her left, and looked up to see another Kadana bringing a cleaver-like bayonet down towards her face. At the last moment, a shot smacked into the side of the enemy warrior's helmet. Not powerful enough to penetrate, but enough to stun, and it gave Takasa the moment she needed to swipe the bayonet aside and drive her knife up under the helmet and into the neck. She looked round and saw Marlowe, far closer to the action than was safe for him, with his rifle raised to his shoulder. A real shame indeed. Finally, they'd cleared the third level, and the surviving Kadana forces were in full retreat. There was a fourth level with some storage bays, but no inbuilt defensive positions. The remaining defenders were trapped down there now, and there was no way they would hold against the next assault. It was going to be a one-sided massacre. Even better, a one-sided massacre in their favor. When she went over this with Marlowe, his response was, "We should offer them terms of surrender." Surrender? Yeah. They put down their weapons, and we take them prisoner instead of killing them. Of course, this was the trouble with humans. No matter how disciplined they were still weak. They always thought of killing as something to be avoided at all costs. None of them would ever surrender willingly, she explained. We are Masaka. When an enemy is in our power, we do not spare them. We extract any information they have, and then we make sure there is never any chance they can take revenge. She didn't add that this often meant eating them. She was starting to get a sense that humans didn't approve. The only time prisoners are taken is when a soldier is too seriously injured to take her own life. That is the way things are done. Maybe you should think about doing things differently. She was about to retort that maybe he was the one who should think of doing things differently. But that was not what would serve the best interests of the clan. If humans were weak, so much the better. They had tactical competence, and when Clan Jakota came for them, they would not underestimate it like Clan Kadana had. But in the end, no matter how disciplined they were, the humans' weakness would be their undoing, and Clan Jakota's strength would ensure their triumph. No, it might be a shame, but better that the humans were weak. It is the way things are, Takasa finally replied. Enough talking, let's finish this. Without giving him the chance to argue again, she turned away and started giving orders to her sisters. Her forces started redeploying to storm the final layer of the subterranean fortification. It would all be over soon. She was surprised to find that the layout of the fourth sublevel wasn't exactly as it appeared on her maps. Their intelligence must be slightly out of date. No matter. An extra storage hangar or two wouldn't make much of a difference. She ordered her fastest soldiers to scout the area, in conjunction with the humans, and ascertain the enemy positions. Instead of dispersing their defense, the surviving Kadana had concentrated themselves in the largest hangar. It made sense. They didn't have the numbers left to defend multiple points. A heavy equipment storage bay, except there didn't seem to be much there. Just a few crates and the cranes used to move them. Not much cover. Nothing to slow an attacker down. There was one entrance. They had no way out. Her forces had the enemy cornered. Takasa thought about working with the humans to lure the Kadana out, but in the end she decided that the most direct way was the best way this time. The Masaka would make a frontal assault, with the humans in support. Once more she lined her troops up. They were eager, stomping and jostling each other. They could sense the end was near, and they wanted to make sure they got the chance to cut open the enemy and feast on their flesh. Normally Takasa would have been just as excited, but this time, for some reason, she thought of the bloody fight to come didn't interest her. She just wanted this to be over. Without further delay, she ordered her troops to charge. Rifles firing, rockets blasting, the attackers forced the defenders to take cover. A few still managed to lay down some fire, take out a few of Takasa's force, but not enough to make any difference. Thundering forward, feeling the air sizzle with plasma, and then the shock of impact as the two sides crashed into one another. Hacking, slashing, stabbing, kicking, punching, Takasa tore through the enemy. There were more of them than she'd expected, but her forces still well outnumbered them. Victory was within arm's length. She only had to reach out and rip it from the enemy's grasp. Then, on the girders the cranes were hanging from, heavy weapons teams started to throw off the tarpaulins they'd been hiding under. It was a trap. The Kadana had kept a final reserve and bet everything on luring the attackers into this room. Takasa wasn't going down without a fight, though. As the defenders above opened fire, heedless of hitting their own troops, she threw herself into the melee all the harder. The Kadana hadn't factored in the humans she still had in reserve, and they were about to get a nasty surprise. She just had to keep fighting, and survive long enough for the humans to tip the balance back in their favor. But the seconds ticked by and no help came. One of her sisters fell to a point-blank plasma blast, and Takasa screamed with rage and threw herself at the shooter. She'd kill every one of them herself if she had to. But for all the rage coursing through her, she knew that they were losing. Where were the humans? Captain Marlowe, the Jakota force is taking heavy casualties. Shall I redeploy Alpha and Bravo squads to support them? Negative, Lieutenant. Hold them here! But they're getting cut to pieces. They won't last long under that kind of firepower. Believe me, I know. I have my orders, Lieutenant. Orders? The young officer looked at Marlowe with confusion. Marlowe made sure the channel was private, then nodded. Orders straight from General Schultz. Once we're sure we have the mission in hand, our allies are expendable. Intel's analysis of the Masaka says their psychology doesn't allow for any real concept of friendship. In fact, Earth Command is pretty sure that the Jakota will turn on us the moment we're done with the Kadana, and from everything I've seen so far, I agree. I guess they figure we're just too stupid to notice, but then their foot soldiers aren't the brightest bunch. I had noticed they don't seem to have a lot of respect for us. The lieutenant nodded. Precisely. When the mission's over, the fewer Jakota there are, the better. We'll finish off the surviving defenders when they've taken care of the Jakota for us. He paused, then added, Believe me, I know that it seems kind of dishonorable. I won't pretend it sits well with me, stabbing an ally in the back. But orders are orders, and I can see the sense in them. I understand, sir. But still, it's a shame, isn't it? They are excellent fighters. It's the way it's got to be, Lieutenant, Marlowe said. But then he thought of Takasa, trying her best to be a real commander in a society that only valued brutality, and he whispered almost under his breath, But yeah, it's a shame.